Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're going to talk about the hidden agenda of the neocons, hidden agendas of the neocons, and how the Ukraine conflict has exposed their miscreant motives. Hello, Garland here. So let's talk about this. Let's get right to it. I think one of the interesting things that has happened, the Ukraine conflict has done a number of things, but one of the things that it has done, it is created an environment where it's much more difficult for the hegemonic inclinations of those who run the U.S. empire to remain in the dark. You know, it's everything has been pulled out by the Ukraine conflict, by great power conflict, and so let's talk about a couple of the things. One of the things that the U.S. empire, and how can I put this? The U.S. empire pushes in order to operate, in order to do two things: to keep its people docile, to keep its people cooperating with policies that don't benefit them, and to keep the European colonies on board. They have had to perpetrate a couple of frauds on the people, right? Now, so let's start with the first. There's so many I could start, but we'll start with this. The first fraudulent reality that I think has been one of the first that was exposed to me is the concept of European independence and sovereignty. You know, a lot of people have really been woken up, been awakened by this reality. So what happened? And forgive me if you've heard these things before, but I'll try to make it as brief as possible. One of the things that happened after World War II was that there was a kind of an unwritten agreement. It wasn't even an agreement, a reality that happened between the two great world powers of the Soviet Union and the United States empire. And they were, to some extent, the Soviets were an empire and the US was an empire, but kind of two different kinds. One was a more assertive, offensive empire, and I think one was a more defensive empire, but they were both empires. And the Soviets, and for different reasons. So here's what happened. This dynamic manifested itself after the World War II. The Soviets felt that they needed a defensive buffer from the West. They felt that the Nazis were a construct of what they would consider the Anglo-Saxon or the U.S. British Empire, and they felt that some may argue that was quite accurately so. They felt that the U.S. empire and the Brits, that was still a very powerful empire at the time, had built up the Nazis in order to be a bulwark against them and maybe to eventually attack them anyway. And so they felt they needed a buffer. So they grabbed at the end a lot of countries, all of these countries in Eastern Europe, as a buffer zone, you know, and as a seat of power to say, okay, we're going to keep these countries. But they didn't make any pretense that these countries were independent or sovereign. They said, we're going to take them and they're ours and they're under our rule. They were pretty straightforward about it. What the US did was went in a different direction. They said, we're going to take all of Western Europe, but we're going to pretend that they're independent and sovereign. And while the Soviets didn't have any illusions about independence and sovereignty for the Western Europe, the Europeans did. They thought they were free. They thought they were sovereign. You know, at least the people did. I think that the elite ruling class knew otherwise. I mean, let's face it, what happened when the US went from the OSS, Office of Special Services, I believe, to the CIA? What was their first big mission in the late 40s? They went to Greece and they spent tens of millions of dollars, I think over 40-some million dollars back in those days, to stop the socialists in Greece from taking power. So the first thing that the US did was basically, one could argue, kind of overthrew the government of Greece, did a preemptive overthrow of the government of Greece. The US made it clear that they were in control of Western Europe, and that no country in Western Europe would be allowed, permitted to have a government that the United States did not approve of. And that meant they had to be a right-wing government, right? So the US took control, but what they did different was they maintained an illusion of sovereignty and independence, even though it wasn't there. And I mean, Charles de Gaulle, what happened? The United States, and the CIA also worked with some, um, one might say, rogue elements within France to try to assassinate Charles de Gaulle. You know, Charles de Gaulle got out of NATO. Charles de Gaulle was very good friends and had a very good relationship with the Soviets, and the U.S. wanted him dead and tried to work with rogue elements in France to assassinate him, to overthrow him. Many argue on more than one occasion. So the reality is that the U.S. meddled in France, meddled in any of the Western countries that they considered colonies. They did not consider these countries to be sovereign. 1975, look up Gough Whitlam in Australia, the United States utilizing the crown, utilizing the Queen of England. 1975, the government of Australia got a little chesty and Gough Whitlam decided he was a little bit of a lefty. He was a little bit of an independence-minded guy, and didn't want to go along with the U.S. when it came to Vietnam. And the U.S. government basically overthrew the government of Australia, took him out of office. The work with the Brits took him out of office and put someone else in office. So it was clear Australia didn't have sovereignty. So over the course of time, when it was absolutely necessary, the U.S. and the Brits would work together to overthrow the government, to replace any leader that they needed to replace, to interfere in the Western colonies of Europe and the extended British Empire anywhere they needed to ensure that the government that they wanted in place was in place. I heard people who have had a thought, I've heard on more than one occasion, I'll put it like this, from people who would know, who have talked about what leaders and elite ruling class in Europe literally saying, we don't have any say. Literally making that statement, we don't have any say. I have heard stories of people who were in the room with people, very, very powerful leaders in Europe during the COVID, who wanted to make a particular decision when it came to COVID. I won't even say what it was. This is not about COVID, but a leader of a particular country that wanted to make a particular decision. And the U.S. government contacted them and said, no, you can't do that. And they just basically said, okay, because they knew they didn't have any say. And in the event that they went outside of the dictates of the U.S. Empire, that they were going to be overthrown. This is within the last 3 years. Think about it. So here's my point. The leaders of Europe and the elite ruling class knew about the illusion, but the people didn't know. So one of the things that has happened, I believe, with the Ukrainian conflict is that the veil of fake um, independence and sovereignty have been torn off. And now you have people in Germany who are getting angry. There was a descendant of the royal family, I believe, that they recently arrested, and they said, yes, there was some right-wing plot to overthrow the government. You guys are probably all familiar with that. It was all on the news quickly, and then it was gone. It was on the news, and then overnight it was gone, right? And they said these people wanted to overthrow the government, blah, blah, blah. But when you look into it, one of the things that this person who was a descendant of the German royal family was saying was, we don't have any sovereignty. We don't have a country. We're completely overthrown by the United States. We have to. So the reality is, what they were complaining about was a valid complaint, and it was actual. It was real. And this story sure has disappeared awful fast. If you think about that, Germany, the most powerful economy, one of the most powerful countries in the world, and I would argue second to Russia, now that people are starting to realize how powerful Russia's economy is, but the second most powerful economy, probably the economic engine of Western Europe. And there is a claim that there was an attempt to overthrow the government, and it's just disappeared within weeks. That doesn't make sense. Almost like it was a fake. The whole thing was a fraud, right? It seems to me. And it sounds to me like there were people who were, kind of pushing reality. There were people saying, wait a minute, our country has been completely controlled by the US government, occupied by the US government. We're Germans and we're not happy about it. Kind of a nationalist position and not an unreasonable position. And apparently that may be what got them squashed. That maybe got what got them taken out. But the bottom line is, de Gaulle's son recently said the same, grandson recently said the same thing. He recently came out, Charles de Gaulle's grandson, and said, the United States started this thing and the Europeans are suffering and NATO's a problem. I mean, he said what we all know. And, that's been reported here and there, but not broadly. And he said that he also said that sentiment is changing in France and people are starting to understand it. So what's going on now? This is part of what I'm talking about. The illusion of independence and sovereignty has been exposed, and the veil of democracy has been pulled off. And so the people of Europe are starting to say, whether they can do anything about it is another story. But the reality is this: you can't fix a problem until you identify the problem, right? There are various one of the things I used to teach these problem solving models, right? And they'd all be acronyms, right? Like define was one of the problem solving, and each letter DEFINE, and you take each letter and that stood for something, and then you would go through this problem solving model, right? And the first letter of define is D, and what is it? Define the problem. Before you can get started working on a problem, you got to clearly understand what the problem is. And what's happening in Europe now is people have gone from, hey, we'll make our decisions and decide what we're going to go, to, hey, wait a minute. Why is it that our government is not listening to the people? It's listening to people in another country that don't seem to be very competent and taking actions that are not in our best interest. And our corporations seem to be vacating, going in all different ways, but they ain't staying here. And things don't look good for the future. Our future looks worse. Our present, our past was pretty rosy. Our present ain't too hot, and our future looks real dim. And so one of the things that's happening here, as a result of the Ukraine conflict, is it's being exposed to the people of Europe that they don't have independence and sovereignty. And that's a problem for the neocons. That's a problem for the ruling elite of Europe, because the reason that they were able to maintain power and complete authority over Europe was mainly because the people of Europe did not completely know that they were under the thumb of the US empire. Now that they know, a lot of them know, there's still some schmucks that are running around with blue and yellow flags, don't get me wrong, right? But you're always going to have those kind of idiots. But my point is, a lot of people in Europe are waking up, and the first thing they're waking up to is we don't have any sovereignty. The British, forget the British. It's funny because the British felt like, you know what, if we can do Brexit and get out from under the EU, we'll have sovereignty. They did Brexit. They got out from under the EU, as it were, right? And now they realize something. Things aren't getting any better. In fact, they're getting even worse. Why? Because when they were under the EU, you had the US used that as an umbrella organization to control the economic and cultural and domestic policies of the country. Once they got out from under the EU, then the elite ruling class in Britain could just run rampant and just say, yes, we're completely part of the United States now. We're ready to roll. And they could completely go, they felt, I put it like this. When England was under the EU, it was under an umbrella group, and it was one of the countries controlled in one umbrella group by the US. Once it came out from under there, sitting by itself, the US just grabbed it and said, great, sit on my left-hand knee here and do what I tell you. They were completely lost everything, gone to absolute puppetry. And their elite ruling class is very happy with that. The elite ruling class wants to be part of the United States elite ruling class, and vice versa, I might add. Both of them romanticize about the lives of the elite ruling class in the other countries. So they're bonded together. The problem is the people of Europe, the people of England are not taken into account. And so they're just, forget them, who cares about them? One of the things that I've said lately that was very revealing. Apparently, Prince Harry has a book coming out, and in this book, he admitted that he was in Afghanistan, that he was running a helicopter gunship, and there was some, Muslim people running around on the ground, and he machine gunned, and he said he killed 25 people. He doesn't feel bad about it, though, because in his words, he saw them as chess pieces. They were bads that had to be killed before they could kill the goods. They were chess pieces on a board. I say that's very revealing, because you can't get any much more ingrained as part of the ruling class than a member of the royal family, right? So when Prince Harry said, I saw the people of Afghanistan that I was shooting down there as nothing more than pieces on the chessboard, right? They were just pieces on the chess. There was nothing. They weren't human, completely dehumanized to him. What he was also letting us know is that the ruling elite class view us exactly the same way. Remember, they're globalists. They float around the world. They don't care about boundaries, right? So he's saying, I view the littles, the nothings out there, as chess pieces on the chessboard. That's why that even now, as the British people are saying, we're going to strike, we're hungry, we lost our way of life, our pubs are closing, everything that we know is going to hell. What's going on with our life? England has fallen. England has fallen into complete mayhem, right? And the people are saying, this is England. We're not supposed to live like this. We're supposed to be a first world country, and now we're living worse than developing world countries. And they look at their leaders, and their leaders are like, you guys are just chess pieces on the chessboard to us. You think we really care? Do you mistakenly think we care about your life and your lifestyle and your culture? You are sadly mistaken. In the same way that Prince Harry looked down those helicopter gun sites and he saw those Muslims running around there in Afghanistan, and he machine gunned them because their lives meant nothing to him. They were nothing but chess pieces on the chessboard. He feels the same way about his British subjects. They feel the same. The French ruling elite feel the same thing about the French. The German ruling elite, they've made it clear. Annalena Baerbock, a few months ago, said, we're going to support Ukraine. I don't care what the voters think. She was saying exactly the same thing. They're nothing but chess pieces on a chessboard to us. Look what they're doing with the lives of the Ukrainians, throwing them away like garbage. Hey, attack those Russian artillery positions, but we'll all be killed. What do you think? We didn't figure? Oh, really? Oh, what a surprise. You'll all be killed. Shut up. Go attack them, and all of you die. Why? You're nothing but chess pieces on a chessboard. It's like, what is it? The marble pieces. Well, those are the black pieces. Those are the white pieces. They're all chess pieces to us. They're pawns. If you ain't the king or queen, they ain't interested in you. Maybe a rook or a knight or something. Okay, sure, fine. But if you're a pawn, you're a chess piece on a chessboard, and you are expendable. And that's what Prince Harry was saying. But the problem they have is this: in the actions that they're taking, because this was supposed to be hidden. Remember, this was hidden. We're a democracy. Remember, what was his name? Barrep, whatever the hell, right? He recently also said that Europe is a garden and the rest of the world is a jungle. And we can't let the people out there in the jungle come screw up our garden. And if we don't deal with them out there, they're blah, 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 blah. He was implying that the people of Europe are viewed as a higher level creatures than those outside of Europe, right? He believes that, but he don't believe it about you. You see what I mean? It was the ruling elite class are the garden. The garden didn't mean all of the plebes. It didn't mean the people wandering around here working or losing their jobs or losing everything. That wasn't part of the equation. No. That's not the garden. The garden is the castle. The garden is the wealthy gated neighborhood, the vine-covered old castle that the wealthy people live in. That's the garden. Out there where the yellow vest people are marching on the street, you ain't part of the garden, my friend. You're fertilizer for the garden. That's what you are. You're fertilizer for the garden. So my point is, the first thing that I think has been exposed in the most profound way is that the countries of Europe do not have sovereignty and independence, and that the ruling elite class in Europe does not have any concern for the well-being, for the lifestyle, for the long-time economic and physical health of its citizens. And that is powerful because that opens the door to some things. That means now that the people of Europe have the opportunity to make decisions, except the idiots that are still running around with blue and yellow flags. Forget them. They may as well go jump on the battlefield and go hug an artillery piece themselves, because they're brain dead, if not physically dead. But you know what? As life gets worse for them and worse for them, some of them will wake up too. But some of those, some sheep, you just can't wake up. But over and all, it's getting harder. The polls are changing, and the people of Europe, I do believe that I don't see how the EU, the NATO sticks around. Right now, it's obvious that Hungary wants the hell out. It's obvious that Turkey is already out. Turkey had applied to go in the EU. Turkey does not want to be in the EU. Hungary, they've made statements, and yet recently about the EU, how it's no place for them. NATO, Turkey is already out of NATO. I'll put it like this. They're de facto non-NATO members anymore because they can see what it is right now. They understand what countries around the world understand now is to join the Europe, to join NATO, to join the EU, to be a part of that coalition means to give up your sovereignty, means to give up your independence. And it means you cannot be a member of NATO or the EU. You can only be a prisoner of NATO or the EU. It's like human trafficking. It's like volunteering to give up your freedom. Well, okay, yes, I want to be a slave. Nobody wants to be a slave. And you know that if you come in there, that means give it all up. And then they're going to say, oh, by the way, you got to buy more weapons and you got to buy them from the US. The game is up. The jig is up there. And so the issue of sovereignty and independence is being exposed. And I think that over the course of time, okay, yeah, right now, these governments can get away with it because they're not having elections, but the time will come when these European countries will have to deal with elections, and they're going to have to either stop the elections or do something. But all over the place, there are going to be people saying, I don't want any parts of this anymore. I'm done with this. And I don't mean like this clown in Italy who played the game and claimed that she was going to be somehow the far right populist, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as she got in, she said, yes, we're 100% behind Ukraine. And, I'm just another WEF puppet. No, I don't mean her. I mean people who really have had enough. It's just a matter of time. So we'll see how that works out. But I think now that the people in Europe have been awakened, it's going to be difficult, but so many years to hold on to power for these for the particular ruling elite class now that is in charge. The other thing is it's going to be very difficult to drag these people into a confrontation with China. That's a whole nother video. So that's one thing. The other thing is this, and if you'll notice what I'm saying, when I talk about waking people up, when I talk about exposing things, the obvious question should be this: to whom? To whom? I don't mean the African people. They already knew they were getting screwed over by the colonial powers. I don't mean the people in South America. They already knew they were being screwed over by the colonial powers. I don't mean the Muslim people. They already knew they were getting the hell bombed out of them and getting robbed blind by the colonial powers. What I mean is the people in the colonial powers, the citizens in the colonial powers, the constituents of these neoliberal governments. So now, one of the things I see happening, I do see some changes in the United States. I do see some eyes waking up. People are asking questions that they didn't ask before, at the beginning. And luckily for me, I'm fortunate because if you probably know what I have a radio show on Radio Sputnik, which is Russian radio. No, it's like RT, and that's in Washington, D.C., and that's daily, Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. in Washington, D.C. It's on the internet, but it's also on terrestrial radio. So people are hearing what I have to say there. But there are a lot of people that are just on RT or just on Sputnik or just on Press TV. Fortunately for me, I also have two shows on the Pacifica network, which is an independent network, and I have one in Washington, D.C., and I have one in Los Angeles, KPFK. So I get the feedback, and I get to see all along. I had this from the very beginning. I had these shows. So I get to get feedback outside of Radio Sputnik. The people in Radio Sputnik that are listening to Radio Sputnik mostly already know what's going on. So when I get the feedback from the outside, well, when this war started in Los Angeles, the feedback that I got, I am who I am. right? But the feedback that I got at the station, there's one guy at the station, he hated my guts. There were people that would call in sometimes and callers and disagree with me and blah, blah, blah. And I got some pushback, but I said what I believed in. That's who I am. And I said, you know what, if I don't say what I believe in on this station, if somebody throws me off, then I shouldn't be here. You know, if I don't say what I believe in, I don't have a right to be in front of this microphone anyway. So I'd say I'm here until I'm gone, and I'm going to say what I believed in. And I got a lot of pushback, but I've noticed changes. And let's not forget, Los Angeles, California. Okay, it's old blue, no matter who, Democratic, place where a lot of people are Democrats, right? But don't forget also about Los Angeles. California is just racked with homelessness now and all kinds of stuff like that. Tent cities all over the place. It is a mess. People are leaving there. It's expensive to live. It's miserable to live. It's a piece of crap. Right. California used to be used to go LA. It was the big city of dreams. Now you go there, it's a big city of tense homelessness and filth and poverty. It's a mess, disaster. Okay. So the people there can see through there. So now when I open the phones, we do have some issues with phones, but when I'm able to take callers, man, these people know more about the Ukrainian conflict than I do. They're talking about the Minsk Accords. They're talking about various and sundry things that they weren't doing before. So the bottom line is you've got people like Jimmy Dore, the Jimmy Dore Show. By the way, when I started on KPFK, when I came there, we didn't have a lot of pushback. We had some neoliberal crap there, and we had some I think it's an independent station, but I mean, we had a few people there that were where I am, and we had some people who were just plain old straight out Democrats, right? KPFK in Los Angeles, we got Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone now. We got Code Pink now, right? We've got some people there that are truly anti-war, anti-establishment, anti-imperialist stuff going on at KPFK. That's good news to me. That's really, really good news to me. KPFK. So the station at KPFK, in my opinion, is starting to get more of an anti-imperialist, anti-war flavor. And I'm happy with that. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm happy with the changes that are being made there. It's none of my business. I don't run or own the station. I'm just a schmuck that does a show there. I'm just saying I see changes happening there. Right. On my show in DC, it started off, I'd get callers, Putin, the Putin crap, right? That's changing. The callers now know what time it is. They know what's going on. They're listening. I went to a friend of mine's house in DC, and they were like, man, our next door neighbor wants to meet you. I'm like, really? Yeah, they listen to your show all the time. I'm like, oh, great. So I wanted to meet the next door neighbors, came over to meet me. And I was like, oh, yeah, you listen to my PFW show? Yeah. But your show with Dr. Leon on Radio Sputnik, I really like that. I'm starting to notice that more and more people are like, oh, no, yeah, your Pacifica show's fine. But your show on Sputnik, it's on every day for 2 hours for one thing. And I'm like, wow, people are like, all these people are listening to Radio Sputnik. That's a good thing. And they're getting an alternative perspective. And I'm on PFW, and we've got some good stuff there, man. We got some good anti-imperialist stuff going on at WPFW. So there's some voices being heard in the U.S. that may not be heard other places. BAI and New York is also Pacifica. They're starting to get some stuff. So there's good things happening. There's people waking up. There's people starting to learn and what they're learning. So here's my point. Back to the theme of this particular show, and that is that things are being exposed. I think one of the things that are being exposed is the United States, the motives of the U.S. empire, and that the fact that the U.S. is an empire, because the U.S. has been hiding. No, we're not an empire. We got 850 bases around the world, but we're not an empire. And now people are starting to recognize in the U.S. that the U.S. is meddling in the affairs of other countries, hypocritically arguing what other countries should and shouldn't do. Going after Julian Assange, saying Juan Guaido is the president of Venezuela. So people are starting to wake up to A, the fact that the United States is in fact an empire, and B, that the claim that the U.S. is out to do good is a fraud. So that more and more Americans are waking up to realize that the U.S., we're not out there to do good. That we're out there to get, to get paid. They're starting to see the money, the money thing also, because a big discussion in the U.S. Let's not forget, one of the discussions always in the U.S. is taxes, tax money. Our tax, they tax us too much. What our taxes are being spent on, blah, blah, blah. That is a result of the U.S. pushing the rugged individualism, the me, I don't want to share with other people kind of stuff. And as a result of that, of the result of the foundational ideology of the US, um, people have always been very concerned about their tax dollars and what they're being spent on, and hey, why are my dollars have to be spent on this or that. That if you're not in the US, you wouldn't know. That's a common discussion in the US. People who talk about politics talk about what are my tax dollars being spent on. Now, the fact that this schmuck Zelensky showing up every other week asking for another 20, 30, 40 billion dollars are not going is not going over well amongst people who have that conversation as a common part of their political discussion. So every time you show up, this guy's like, I want another 40 billion. So people on all sides of the aisle are quick to say, hey, why are we giving this guy 40 billion? Why couldn't it be built on spent on my roads or something for us, or given back to me in taxes, or whatever the case? So another thing that has caused people great pause in the US is all of this money flowing out ostensibly to Ukraine. The information came out that some of the money was being spent in crypto, and people are like, what the hell? You mean to tell me we're giving these people 40, 50 billion dollars and they're out buying Bitcoin? You got to be kidding me, right? So that was part of the discussion that's waking people up. So one of the things that's happening in the United States is people are waking up to understand that we're in an empire, and this empire ain't out to do good. This is not an empire that's out to go around the world and help people. Part of that too is Joe Biden. A lot of people are realizing what a horrible president he is, that he made a bunch of promises. He's out to keep none of them. Zero, none, nine, nothing. That everything that he said, and he's exposing that by exposing that the U.S. is an empire and is not out to do good by the fact that he made certain promises, and all the promises were what you would call kind of populist kind of promises, kind of left-leaning kind of promises, left-leaning promises, right? We're going to do some things about healthcare. We're going to do some things basically that would help the working class. None of them that he's done, but he's got more money for war, unlimited money for war, unlimited money for war. And their only focus, the focus of the Biden administration, is foreign policy. He could care less about domestic policy. They're neocons. Neocons don't care about domestic policy. Let me go back to what I said in the beginning. What does the ruling class think? In the same way that Prince Harry said, those people that I shot from the helicopter gunship were what? Pieces on a chessboard, not human. And what did I say? That's how they view us. People in the US are coming to the reality that their government just ain't into them. And they're saying, well, the only thing they care about is Ukraine. The only thing they care about is giving money to Israel, buying more ships, buying more planes. What about us? So it is exposing the reality that the US doesn't give a crap about the people, that the citizens are not part of the equation, that the government has completely disassociated itself from its responsibility for the general welfare. In our Constitution, we have a clause called the General Welfare Clause, right? Our government has disassociated itself from that. So that's something that has been exposed by the Ukraine conflict, that the government is not operating on behalf of the people, is not responsible to the people. Let me add this. One of the other things that has happened during this Ukraine conflict, I think, I believe that Elon Musk buying Twitter was part of that. I'll tell you why. Because Elon Musk was going along with everything, and then there was talk about nuclear war, and he said, holy crap, I'm scared to death. I don't want to die in a nuclear war. Think about this. You're rich. You're one of the richest people in the world. You got the mansions, you got the power, you got the glory, you got the babes, you got everything. And you think, and these idiots are going to kill me in a nuclear war and I'm going to lose it all. And I think it pissed him off. I think it infuriated him. And I think that's one of the reasons that he decided to go ahead and buy Twitter and do it. And I'm not saying he's a good, bad guy. I'm not saying anything about him. I'm saying the fact that Elon Musk bought Twitter and started doing these Twitter files release thing has really opened the eyes of people who didn't believe the things that a lot of us were saying that we intuitively knew. Russiagate was a fraud. Twitter was completely, was nothing but a part of the intelligence community. I have tweeted on, and people that have been following me for a long time know that I tweeted on many occasions, long before Elon Musk bought it. Twitter is nothing but a tool of the intelligence community. Twitter is part of the national security state. I've been tweeting that for I don't know how long, but people like us intuitively knew it. There were a lot of people who shook their head. Oh no, oh, what are you talking about, Garland? That's absurd. Well, now that has been exposed. The incestuous relationship between the government and these corporations, right? Because we're learning not only did they do it with Twitter, they did it with social media, they did it with Google, and you think they didn't do it with and you know, you'd have to be very naive to think that MSNBC and Fox and all of these weren't in the room also. So one of the other things, again, so many things have been exposed. One of the things that has really, truly been exposed is the incestuous relationship between the United States government and the social, the big tech, the social media platforms, big tech, et cetera. Now, remember, there were a lot of us who absolutely knew that. But there was a lot of people who didn't. I mean, just because you knew it, don't assume that other people knew it. A lot of people didn't know it. So there are people now that they can't deny it because they have, you know, it's as one might say, it is, I forgot the term I'm looking for, but the bottom line is this. There's no way, I know the term I was looking for. It is rhetorically unassailable, right? That the United States national security state works directly with social media platforms, news platforms, etc., to censor the language of everyday citizens. Now, done, rhetorically unassailable. We know that happened. The evidence is out, clear, and it's out. And so that's one of the things that has happened. The result, I don't think that would happen if it wasn't for the Ukraine conflict. And let's go one further. The whole idea that the United States is an empire brings some things with it, right? If the United States is just a country, we're out doing well and we can't afford this and we can't afford to do this. We're doing the best we can. We're helping other countries. We're not helping other countries. We like countries with some we like, some we don't, you know, our leaders, blah, blah, blah. But if we're an empire, that changes it, doesn't it? If we're in an empire wants to grow, an empire is expansionist, an empire is hegemonic. That is the nature of empire. And now that people are realizing that this is an empire, they're looking at it and they have to question our motives and say, why are we in Ukraine? Are we in Ukraine to do good? And we see things. Let me show you this. Let me show you this. This is part of it. Here's an interesting article. Ukraine on NATO mission, defense minister said, right? Kiev is shedding blood to carry out the mission NATO set for itself, NATO being the US empire, to provide weapons and ammunition in return, Ukrainian defense minister Alexei Reznikov said for an interview on a domestic channel, right? Today, Ukraine is addressing that threat. We're carrying out NATO's mission today without shedding their blood. We shed our blood, so we expect them to provide weapons, he said. He also claimed that his NATO colleagues have told him both in conversations via text message that Ukraine is the, listen to this, shield of civilization and defending the entire civilized world, the West. Now, I would argue to the Ukrainians, apparently, they don't consider you part of the civilized world. If you're defending the civilized world, you notice the civilized world ain't defending itself. You are, you idiot. So what they're saying is this. We don't really think much of the Slavs, their disposable lives. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to provide you lots of money and you guys can go fight and die like dogs for us. It's really immoral and unethical on a stunning and unimaginable scale for the US empire to say to Ukraine, we're going to set you against a superpower that's next door and watch your people get shredded like mincemeat. And for this clown, this ideologue idiot, see, that's the problem that the Ukrainians have. This ideologue idiot to say, bring it on. See, the United States very skillfully crafted this monster that's called Ukraine, very, very skillfully. What they did over the course of many years, and I don't mean since 2014, they've been doing this since World War II. What they did was they created a country to its very core, from at least the West, right? The Western Ukraine and the Nazi elements, to despise Russia to their core, to despise Russia with a fury and rage, right? They created that. They nurtured that. They built and strengthened a country that trained children from little to be Nazis, to worship the ideology of the Third Reich, and to believe that it was their job to bring the evil Russians next door to heel. They also trained them that if you start the fight, we'll support you. And since the Russians are inferior anyway, they won't be able to fight very well. Haven't been paying attention to history if you believe that one, but they won't be able to fight very well. You will easily defeat them. You'll have a war. The US will come in and jump in, and the Russians can't possibly win. So they very skillfully set up a suicidal society. A society that's sitting next door to a superpower. And they came in and they said, we're going to start digging trenches and we're going to set everything up for you to go to war with the superpower next door. And we will fund you and you will surely defeat them. And these poor schleps believed it. And now they've been set up against the Russians and they're getting turned into mincemeat. And idiots like this are like, yay, let's keep bringing the weapons, as if a war was just about weapons, any weapons. As if all you got to do is hand people weapons. Just give us weapons. Now, you imagine you got 10 Japanese samurai who've trained from like birth how to use. They've got their samurai swords, and they've trained day and night, year after year. They are deadly, and they've trained to fight together with those samurai swords, right? And you come up against them, and they are like a well-oiled machine. They will cut you long, deep, and wide. And you got a bunch of other guys over here, and you give one of them a sword, you give one of them a knife, you give one of them a hammer, give another one of them a baseball bat. They're not trained, and you send them out, and they're trained, they're kind of trained, and they get slashed to pieces by the samurai. And so you just grab some random people off the street after that and say, all right, we're going to give you a baseball bat, we're going to give you a knife, we're going to give you some kind of a sword you've never seen before, we're going to give you something else. And you just give them random weapons, and they're untrained, and you say, go back against those samurai. What's going to happen? They're going to get chewed to pieces quickly, right? So now the original Ukrainian army that was trained to go against the Russians has been decimated. So now they're just like, yeah, we'll just find any random weapon we can and put it in your hands and go fight the Russians. An army that has trained for I don't know how long to defend their border, and you're fighting them on their border. And you've got random people, 60-year-old guys that you pulled off the freaking streets of Lvov and put any kind of weapon in their hand. Here they go. Here's a mortar. I've seen pictures, teenagers, 17, 18-year-old teenagers. Here you go. Here's a weapon. And you're fighting against trained soldiers who are motivated, and you're just thrown out on the battlefield. They're getting chewed up, right? And the bottom line is, the Ukrainian leadership is so corrupt and such mad ideologues that they don't care. They're like, yeah, it doesn't matter. We're fighting the Russians. Hooray, keep fighting the Russians, right? The Western leadership is so thoroughly corrupt and evil that they're like, that's the Ukrainians' jobs. Their job. What they say, the shield of civilization. They're saying the Europeans, we must maintain our civilization such as they see it. And the way we're going to do it is you Ukrainians, all of you going to have to die, all of you, to defeat the Russians. And it looks like they may be looking at the Poles next. Hey, Poles, yeah, the Ukrainians are all dead. Yeah, your turn. Why? Because somebody's got to die for us. Go over there and charge into that Russian artillery, and you'll be gone next. What about that? I don't know. Romanians, whatever we can find. We got some Slavs laying around here somewhere that we can get shredded to pieces. That's the way they're thinking. And these people who I put it like this: in Ukraine, I think there's two sets. There's the set of pure ideologues who are like, we hate the Russians and we must stand up and fight against them because we're Nazis and we're the defenders of the white race worldwide. You know how that whole Nazi thing goes, such as it is. And so their ideologues charge into the artillery and let their people get wiped out. You got them, but you also have an element of oligarchs who are making bank, dude, making bank. You know, they're buying crypto, they're selling these weapons all over the world, they're just banking some of the money and stashing it into offshore accounts. So you do have an element in Ukraine that is so fundamentally corrupt that they're happy to sell, to get rid of, to throw every last Ukrainian soldier into the wood chipper so they can keep getting paid as long as possible. So there you got the Ukrainians, who are the perfect target, They make sure they're angry and rageful. They weaponize that rage against them, and they throw their bodies at the Russian artillery, and they all get wiped out. And meanwhile, the Western elite are making money off of that too, and money laundering off of that too. So the bottom line is this: Another thing that's being exposed here is that the neocons are simply caught up in the moment with Ukraine, and they're using Ukraine in the most cynical way. They're using the lives of the people in Ukraine in the most cynical way possible. And there's no way you'll ever be able to pull back from that, because at some point, all wars end. And at some point, this will be over. And when it's over, guess what? There will be people who come back from the battlefield of Ukraine who are ready to talk. There'll be people who live in Ukraine. There'll be entire regions of Ukraine where nobody comes home. Entire towns, entire regions. In fact, the entire Western Ukraine, the women and the children and the mothers at the end of this thing are going to say, okay, where's our sons? Can our sons come back? And none of them are coming back. None of them. You will have an entire, all of Ukraine, especially Western Ukraine, all of Western Ukraine, all of these families will be saying they're all dead. But so the generation in the 20s, which is our sons, they're all gone. Well, the 30s, those are our sons too, all gone. The 40s, those are our husband, wiped out. The 50s, those are our fathers, toast, done. Think about the cynicism of this. They're wiping out entire generations of Ukrainian men, and some women now, and some teenagers are thrown out there, wiped out generation after generation, right? So the evil of that is being exposed and will be exposed anymore. And when this thing is over, a lot of Ukrainians are going to be madder at the US and the neocons here and in the West than they will be at the Russians. They're going to say, you betrayed us. You threw us to the dogs. They will be madder at the people who did that to their country than they will at the people on the other side of the battlefield. And that, again, these are things that needed to be exposed. So when that happens, with that, it's going to be hard to throw Taiwan out there, isn't it? It's going to be hard to say to Taiwan, look, your turn. We don't like China anymore. So here's what we're trying to do. Do the same thing. We're going to bait China into attacking you, and then you're going to get the living hell blown out of you. And then we're going to use that to take that as an excuse to like go after China, whether it's go to war with them, whatever we got to do, whether it's cause problems with them, whether it's try to cut them off from the world with sanctions, whatever we want to do. We want to use you, poor little Taiwan, in the same way that we used Ukraine. The fact that what is being done to Ukraine is being exposed, it's going to make it real hard to do it to Taiwan. And of course, to get proxy countries around the world, because every country that we try to use as a proxy in the future is going to look at Ukraine and look at history and say, holy God, I don't want to be that guy. And there's going to be people coming out of Ukraine saying nobody wants to do what we've done. Nobody wants to be what we've been. They're going to be people really looking at the leadership of Europe and the leadership of the United States. And I think we'll want them to be held accountable. Not that they will. I also think that some of the leaders of some of these European countries, that there will be countries saying, you have destroyed our economies. You've destroyed everything. They're going to want to prosecute them. And some of them, there could be in danger of their lives in Europe. Some of the leaders and the ruling elite class in Europe, their lives could literally be in danger. So these things are all being exposed. And the Neocon project of maintaining world hegemony. You know, let's face it. Let me find this. I got a great article. Oh, here's something else. Let me show you this one, talking about things being exposed. I think this is pretty cool. Good article. Let's look at this one. EU's imports of US LNG 5 times higher than Russian supply, right? European Union received US natural gas volume 5 times higher than Russia's pipeline deliveries. Now, they're getting all of this gas, right? They're getting lots more LNG, right? But here's the thing about it that they're angry about. And that is that the US is charging them anywhere from 4 to 7 times more than they charge people here. So basically, one of the things that happened is the Russia's volumes of gas have gone down going to the EU. The United States volumes have dramatically increased, but the United States is price gouging them. So a lot of people in Europe are realizing the US, again, another way they're realizing that the US is not our friends. They're price gouging us, and they're stealing our industry, and they're tearing us to pieces. So the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of Europeans starting to look over here saying, well, part of this game appears to be, part of the plan appears to be that they wanted this energy market from Russia. They didn't like Russia having this energy market. And now we were getting energy from Russia. It was affordable. It's not affordable for the United States. We could talk about if it's 5 times higher, 3 times higher, 100 times higher. We're getting much, much more gas from these people, but it's not an affordable price. There's the discussion of whether you have gas, sure. But there's also a discussion of whether that gas is affordable. So even if the U.S. could replace all of Russian gas going to Europe, which it can't at this point, but let's just say for the sake of argument that it could. If it replaced it at anywhere from 4 to 7 times the price, is it really replaced? Because you may be a European and the gas is available to you. Hey, we got plenty of gas. They call you. Hey, Joe, European. Yeah, we got plenty of gas. Come get it. And you can keep your house warm, and you call back and say, but I have no money to buy it. It's too expensive. So it's not available to you. It is available, but not to you. And the poorer you are, the less available it is. So that's another thing that has awakened the people of Europe to the fact that the United States is not their friend. They're being price gouged by them for energy. And the other thing is, so a lot of people in the U.S. are waking up to the reality that we don't have a healthy party system, that we don't have a healthy political system. Because when you look at our leadership, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they're stunningly incompetent, right? And when you look at the two parties, we've got one party here now that has descended into madness, and I'm talking about the Democrats. The Democrats now are proud because everybody votes the same way every time. When Joe Biden says, this is what I want, everybody in the Democrats says, we're all voting for it, and they're proud of that. And now they say the Republicans, when the Republicans can say, we're going to argue about something, we're going to disagree, and we're going to have trouble coming to an agreement. Now, I'm a lefty. I do not agree with the policies of Republicans whatsoever. Very few policies do I agree with the Republicans. But here's what I'll say. It's a healthier party. The party that has some level of argument, that's how democracy works, right? There should be arguments within the party, intra-party arguments. Before there's inter-party arguments, right? There should be arguments within the party, so they iron things out, and then they go to the other party, and then you iron things out. There should be two separate levels of argument. But in the Democratic Party now, they're proud. They're like, yes, the most far right person in the party and the first and the most progressive lefty in the party agrees, which means you don't have any lefties in the party anymore. You have people who call themselves AOC legitimately calls herself Democratic Socialist, but she doesn't have a Democratic Socialist bone in her body. It's funny that in the United States, the Democratic Party has gotten so far right. Politics have been so far to the right in the United States that Joe Biden, a man who any socialist government in the world, he's trying to overthrow it. He's trying to overthrow all the socialist governments, right? A guy who is a corporate stooge, a guy who does not believe in politics discussed through the lens of economic class, a guy who opposes and screws over organized labor, a guy who goes against everything that left means, right? And in the United States, people say, yeah, he's a socialist and he loves the right. He's a lefty and he's a socialist. Joe Biden in America. That's how far these parties, they're both two right-wing parties. And what the Democrats were able to do is to redefine left, because left, everybody knows what left is. If you're from another country, it's about the discussion of politics through the lens of economic class. Right? That's pretty much your left thing. It tends to be very skeptical of concentrated power. It tends to be very skeptical of corporate power, skeptical of war. That's traditional left. This is the opposite of what Biden and these people are, but they've redefined left. So now Joe Biden says, and the neoliberals, since they're never going to do anything to push back against corporate power, and they're always going to go against everything that the traditional left believes in, they have to create a new standard for left. So what is it? LGBTQ, stuff like that. So now what they say is, if you believe in drag queen reading to kids things, that defines you as left. nothing to do with economic class. And they've got it to the point where they've got all the Republicans and conservatives in the U.S. saying, yeah, those lefties, all the lefties want to do is the drag queen reading for kids stuff. They have now successfully redefined left away from the discussion of economic class to the discussion of cultural things that they don't really care about. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be honest. If I talk about politics through the lens of economic class, I'm talking about the 99% versus the 1%, right? If I talk about the economics, left through the lens of LGBTQ trans, right? Trans are far less than 1%, right? Far less than 1% of the United States. So now, if I define left as trans, I'm now talking about the 99% versus the 1% instead of the 1% versus the 99%. I'm now standing up saying we are defined by trans people, and define us by trans people, which is less than 1% of the population. Whereas the left traditionally said we want equal rights for every person, but we define ourselves through the 99%, the working class. So we're defined through the working class. I'm a lefty that defines myself through the lens of the discussions of the working class. That's 99% of the country. And the neoliberal definition of left says define yourself through the lens of the trans community, which is 1% of the country, as opposed to defining yourself through 99% of the country. It's a losing hand. You don't. Now, that doesn't mean that the left, who defines itself through the lens of working class, says we hate trans or we love trans or we hate gay or we love trans. Within the context of the working class, there are people who are more socially conservative and less socially conservative. You'll probably find people that are like, I'm all for LGBTQ and trans rights. You'll probably find some people who ain't so progressive when it comes to that area, but they're all within the working class. Within the working class, you know as well as I do, within the working class, there are people who are all for trans and gay rights and stuff like that. And within the working class, there are people that ain't so much. That's a reality. That's a reality, but they're all in the working class, and the left traditionally defines itself through the working class. And so I don't know if that fits in here, how it's been exposed, but that's one of the things that I think the discussions that's being at least brought to the forefront now. And that is, how is the left defined? How is the right defined? Because now, let me add this. So you've got this discussion of MAGA Republicans, right? And it's like, okay, there's some of the Republicans are concerned about the government overreach. There are Republicans now that are concerned about the incestuous relationship between the government and these corporations and these big tech platforms and things of that nature, and First Amendment issues and things of that nature. And so now the Republican Party gets the Senate, and they're getting a wake-up call to learn that what they thought that Republican Party ain't what they thought it was. That they thought the Republican Party was going to jump out and stand up for all the things that they believe in. And now they're finding out that the Republican Party, what did Mitch McConnell come out and say? The Republicans' #1 mission is arming Ukraine. Well, that ain't what most Republicans want. I would be willing to bet that if you take a poll amongst Republicans and say, what's your #1 issue? Arming Ukraine ain't it. A lot of times it's, we're trying to eat, dude, and we're not happy with the price of eggs. Same thing that a lot of people who are on the left are concerned with. But so I think one of the things that is being exposed as a result of this Ukraine is that some people who had confidence in either the Republican or Democratic Party, in the Democratic Party, they're realizing it's just the party of war, and it's just the party of corporate puppetry, and that the people from AOC to Joe Manchin to Bernie Sanders to Joe Biden are just all going to stick together, and they're going to do what the military industrial complex wants, and they're going to do what the people, the oligarchs in power, are going to do. And there are some Republicans, there were sadly, there were some Republicans who truly believed that the excuse me, truly believed somehow, some way, that the Republican Party was going to come in and do the right thing. And now they think that the Republicans are going to come in and honestly do an investigation of the FBI and the CIA and look into what they're doing and all that. I'm sorry, that ain't happening. So those of you who have been following me for a while may remember when the Durham investigation started from the very beginning. And there were people like, ooh, we got him now. John Durham's a hound dog. He's going to go in and find out what those Democrats did and found all of this stuff. And he's going to weed out this. And my position from the very beginning was, I don't trust him as far as I can throw a bar CIA puppet. Durham worked with the Whitey Bulger fraud and hoax. From the very beginning, I said the system is not policing the system. They didn't bring Durham in here to do anything other than to be a cover-up man. I believe that from the and people that have been following me know that's what I've been saying. Durham is nothing but a cover-up man. That's all these people are doing. That's all Barr was. That's all Durham is. And now what are we seeing? Durham, where's Durham? Where's Durham? He charged a couple people at the bottom with nothing, and they walked. So the reality is this: Durham is a fraud. Everything about Durham was a fraud. It was nothing but a cover-up, right? And sadly, if you're a Republican and you think these schmucks coming in here are going to do something, they're going to audit the money of the Ukraine and find out where it's going. They're going to look into Biden and see the evil things that he's done. And then they're going to look into the FBI. Woo, we got him now. We're going to have a new church committee. Not happening. All cover up. They ain't doing nothing to Biden. They ain't touching him. Nothing that they're not told to do, because they're the same people, or they run by the same people. And let me give you an example. I knew John Conyers. Mr. Conyers told me this himself. I used to have him on my radio show all the time. Mr. Conyers, I knew Mr. Conyers. I used to talk to him, go to his office, etc. When he was in the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And I remember talking to him, and he said, when he was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, he wanted to hold hearings on Karl Rove and on Bush and on Cheney regarding the Iraq War. And Nancy Pelosi told him, if you try to do that, there will be a new chairman of the Judicial Committee. No, you're not allowed to do it. That was that, right? So he came in and he wanted to do it. What do you think is going to happen with the Republicans? When they come in and somebody says, I'm looking into the FBI, you'll be able to look as far as they want you to look. You'll be able to walk in and you'll say, well, the evidence is in that folder. Good. Can I open that folder? Nope, you can't open that folder. But that's where all the evidence is. That's what I said. The evidence is in that folder, and you can't answer that folder. Open that folder. And you're the chair of the, as an example, Judiciary Committee, House Investigations Committee on the FBI, whatever the hell they call it, right? And they'll say, now, if you come anywhere near that folder, there's going to be another chair. You're gone. You're out of here. Right? That's the way it works on Capitol Hill. Not happening. Not happening. Not happening. Okay. So the reality is, and somebody said the left are people living a lie about who they are. Well, again, I think you don't understand what the left are. I'm the left. I'm not living a lie. I view politics, where'd they put it? Studio says the left are people living a lie who they are. I'm the left. I ain't living no lie about who I am. No, well, it's nothing for me to live a lie about. Me being a left is not about who I am. It's about, do I view politics through the lens of economic class? Yes, I do. Let me tell you this. The ruling elite view politics through the lens of economic class. So if you don't, you lose. They do. The top 1% view politics through the lens of economic class. If you don't, then they have all the advantage over you. So there's nothing lie about me. Now, if you have been hoodwinked into believing the left is about trans and LGBTQ stuff only, these cultural issues, then you don't know what the left is. And that's the neoliberal left. They ain't left, and they ain't right either. They are fascists, and fascists are whatever they need to be. That's what fascism is. Fascism uses the rhetoric of the left. Fascism uses the rhetoric of the right. Fascism uses any rhetoric it needs to use because it don't care. It's trying to do what it wants to do for the sake of power. And that's something that is being exposed. And that is that our government is operating for the sake of power. And that's been, and the other thing that's being exposed is that the U.S. has some weaknesses, and those weaknesses are being exposed. There's military weaknesses. One of the military weaknesses that's being exposed is this: the U.S. can't do ground war. The U.S. empire cannot do ground war, because ground war is nasty, and you lose people, and you got to have a lot of motivated people. Just think about it. The Russians are on their border, and the Americans are on their border raising hell. And there's a lot of Russians that are saying we're going to defend our border. Well, if the Russians or the Chinese were on the border of the United States, were on Canada raising hell, there's a lot of Americans that would say, I'll put on a uniform and defend our border with Canada from the Russians that want to come across our border and kill us. Yes, they would do that. Right? And they would have motivated soldiers. In order to do ground war, you've got to have motivated soldiers that believe that they're defending their homes and their families and their children and their women and their whatever, right? Okay. So in order to do ground war, you got to have that. And then you have to have all the hardware, and you have to have the industry. You have to have the military industry to produce the hardware that you need. The Russians have that. They have planned for that. They have always kept their industry together. So the Russians are ready to do a ground war on their border to protect that, right? If the U.S. would want to get involved, what would we have to do? We'd have to send all these troops halfway across the world. And then our supply lines would be all the way back to the United States. So we're shipping stuff from Oregon or wherever the hell it's made all the way over to Ukraine to fight the Russians on the Russian border. And the Russians are sending stuff from Russia to the Russian border. Not real far. They make them here, and they put them in a train and take them to the border, and they fire them at you. We make them here. We got to put them on a ship, take them all the way across the ocean. By then, some Russian hypersonic missile has whistled into the side of the ship and blown it to smithereens if we're at war with Russia. That is a long ways to send stuff across the ocean to your supply lines all the way to Ukraine. One of the things that has been exposed is the U.S. builds bases all over the place so they can attack from the air and they can fire missiles, and it's standoff stuff. But they can't send in troops because we don't have the troops. What are we going to do? Are we going to send in a ground force to fight the Iranian army? We're going to go to war with Iran. Do we have the ground force? We're going to send 500,000 troops to Iran, to the border of Iran, to fight the Iranians on their border. And then, meanwhile, hey, we got to fight the Russians. We need 700,000. And you know what the Russians will do? If the Russians were at war, they put 2 million men in arms. So now what are we going to do? We need 1.5 million. We need 2 million men to fight the Russians. So we need 2 million over there to fight the Russians. We need 500,000 over here to fight the Iranians. And don't even get me started with the Chinese. Oh, and what about all of those bases in Africa? We don't have enough people in the country to run the world and have the Roman army where you got this giant army that roams around the world and attacks everybody. No, we don't have enough people to do that. So one of the things that has been exposed is the United States, while it has airplanes and standoff attack stuff, does not have the ground forces to back it up. You hear what I said? Doesn't have the ground forces to back up that. We've got Navy, and so what happens if the U.S. goes to war with Russia or China, and we ain't winning when it comes to Navy, and we ain't winning when it comes to Air Force? Now, keeping in mind something, Russia and China are building up their missiles. They're building on. So, I mean, when you start what happens when you start sailing carriers out and they're getting hit by hypersonic missiles and you lose your carriers? What happens when your bases are getting hit by missiles? You need men with rifles. You need men under arms. You're going to have to take some bases. You're going to have to take some ground. You're going to have to lead people to hold that ground. One of the things that is being exposed here is the United States doesn't have a ground military that can go anywhere in the world and do any damn thing. Because that's not what we've built. And the military industrial complex doesn't make money off ground forces. They make money inventing the F-35 flying piano that doesn't work. The only damn thing that works well on that thing is the ejection seat, and it's a damn good thing it does. We can build that kinds of stuff. We can make all of anti-tank shoulder-fired things and give them to the Ukrainians to die running around carrying them. We can do that kind of stuff, but we don't have the ground force to take the ground and hold the ground. And we do not have within our people, we don't have the will to do that. Americans don't want to do that. Americans don't want to die on some foreign battlefield. Don't want to do it. Don't want to do it. So that's been exposed. So now, basically, if I'm the Chinese, if I'm the Russians, and they say, oh, we're going to get in a fight. Let's see how this ground war works, because you ain't got that. What would happen if the U.S. has military bases all over the place and we want to do standoff attacks, right? So what happens if let's just say for the sake of argument, we get in a war with China, and then there's Missiles fly back and forth the first day, and bases get blown up, and some bases don't. And ships get blown up, and some don't. And satellites get taken out. And let's say, for the sake of argument, but within the first day, the Chinese take all of our satellites out, and we can't watch their ships. We can't, do what they want. And then what they do is they got a lot of men at arms. And in areas where we have bases, they put 20,000 men on the shore, amphibious landings. How are we going to defend that? With standoff attacks, and they're attacking the airfields. They're putting men on the ground, and they're coming in with a military assault teams. That their air bases don't have the military assault teams. We don't have the people. We can't fight a ground war. Every one of our bases would get overrun by men with rifles and mortars, and even small arms would take it over, because we don't have on our bases the military hardware to hold up to a ground war. The United States can't fight a ground war at this point against a major power or superpower. We're not built for that. I'll put it like this. Yes, if given enough time, we can put together enough forces, but can we maintain it? Well, right now, let me ask you this. How long can we fight? We can't. We're running out of stuff given to Ukraine. How long can we keep our own soldiers going up? And bottom line is, we're about to run out of stuff where we're going to give it all to Ukraine, and we ain't going to have none for ourselves. So that's something that's being exposed to the world, that the United States, we got this. If you can come up with the missiles and the anti-aircraft material to neutralize U.S. naval and air power, then that war's over. Think about it. If you can neutralize, and the Russians are pumping out the S-300, S-400, S-500s, they're just cranking them out. If they can have enough anti-aircraft things, and they can have anti-satellite, right? Because the anti-satellite, if they get in a war with the U.S., they take out our satellites. Now we're flying blind. They got anti-aircraft. We try to fly AWACS. They take them out. We're flying blind. Now it's a ground war. If you can take U.S. down to an old school ground war, they can't fight it. We don't have the numbers of things and all. The NATO, they got nothing in Europe. The NATO armies are weak. So one of the things that's been exposed by this, we've been exposed. We got a glass jaw ground war. That's a reality. And so I think that one more thing. I'll go one more thing. Diplomatically, when the war started, the United States thought that India, the Middle East, that the African countries, that when we said to them, "Come to heel," we're all going to go take out Russia, and we need everybody to join us in sanctions. We thought that all of those countries would say yes. But why? Because we thought we had them at heel. We thought they were afraid of us. We thought they were intimidated by us. And what we found out was something far different. They simply said no. If one of them had said no, we could have taken it out. If one country says, no, we're not going to do it, we could sanction them to hell, right? But the fact of the matter is, if all of them said no, what are we going to do? And India had no choice. India's position was, well, we aspire to be a world power, and we see you trying to take out any country that aspires to be a world power. We can't do this. Other countries are looking at it, and they're saying, well, we can't trust you to keep our money in your country anymore. So we're concerned with that. We can't trust that you won't turn on us, that you won't renege on all the deals that you made. So another thing that happened is the United States that thought that it had diplomatic control over a lot of countries around the world, when in fact, the only reason the countries were going along with us was because they felt like they had no choice and they were kind of afraid of us. But when it came down to it, and it became existential for them, when it came down to the fact that these countries need wheat and Russia provides them wheat, when they need raw resources and Russia provides them with raw resources, when it came down to making that decision, they told the U.S., you can go pound sand. We're not going to do it. And all of them did it. And that was exposed that the United States has no diplomatic authority over any countries, no diplomatic power whatsoever. In all of Africa, they thought all of the African countries, well, they'll do what they're told. They're just little old black people. We'll just say, Africa, you do what we tell you or else. And all the African countries, what did they say? We like the Russians. They treat us like we're equals. They treat us with decency and respect. They respect our tradition. They respect our religion. They tell us we don't have to change and be like them. They tell us we don't have to have drag queen shows that read to our kids if we don't want to, but if we want to, we can. They don't care. It's the same with the Muslim countries. They're like, the Russians ain't coming over here telling us that we got to fly put on a Black Lives Matter mask and fly a rainbow flag and say, I believe women, what's whatever, right? They're not, the Russians ain't having that discussion with us. If that's what you want to do, and that's the direction your society is going in, the Russians are fine with it. If it ain't, the Russians are fine with it. Those countries came together and they said, we prefer to do business with someone. We prefer to support someone who will come to our country and say, let's do business. Won't come to our country and say, we've come to transfer our culture onto you. And you got no say in the matter. People like their cultures. They want their culture to be respected. They want a non-interference, unofficially a non-interference clause in their business deals. And they want you to say, if you want to do that, do it. If you don't, it ain't our business. We're here to sell you wheat. We're here to buy X from you. Let's sell X. Let's buy X. Live your lives the way you want. We'll live ours the way we want. No hard feelings. And countries respected that. And China does that too. And so now countries have decided we're going to go with the people who don't screw with us. And they can see that the world is changing and that there are options for them because of Russia and China that weren't there before. The world's changing, and that has been exposed. A lot of countries that didn't realize that Russia and China were an economic and or military option. You've got now countries in Africa calling the Russians saying, send the Wagner Group. I want you to protect us from these crazy white people in the United States. You guys are white people, but you ain't crazy. Send the Wagner Group. Literally, Mali is literally calling the Russians saying, can you please send the Wagner Group over to protect us from these fruitcakes? And so it becomes this. The United States will make stuff about race, right? And we're here for this group and not for that group. The Russians ain't about that. The Russians are like, we're all trying to eat here, dude. You want wheat, we want money. Here's some wheat, give us some money, have a nice day. That they don't have to have that discussion about race or sex or sexuality or whether they're wearing the right clothes or how they cut their hair or what group they recognize or whether women can drive or can't drive. Okay, you can feel like you want about that. But the Russians don't have that discussion with them. And there's countries that want to do business and they don't want, if they have that discussion, they want to have it internally in their country as they determine how their culture moves forward or doesn't move forward. They don't want some asshole coming from halfway across the world to tell them they have to do things differently than they do it. I may not like what they're doing, but it ain't my business. And that's what, we got Americans now. Well, the Chinese don't have rights or do have rights. That's Americans for you. People that claim to be like, yes, I'm a red pilled. What about China? Well, they're not doing what I think they should do. You ain't Chinese, dude. The Chinese are going to do what the Chinese do. Mind your damn business. If the Chinese want to shut down for COVID, open up for COVID, they're Chinese. That's between the Chinese people and the Chinese government. When the Chinese people didn't like the COVID lockdowns anymore, they went out in the street and raised hell, and the Chinese government was like, ooh, shit. Oh, I guess we'll just back off on this little COVID thing a little bit. There you go. They worked it out. It ain't our business. Okay? So the bottom line is there are people in this world who are waking up to the fact that there are other ways to do business with powerful countries other than simply be dragged around by the ear as they lecture you about why you should join their culture and doing things that may not be appealing to your culture. That's all I'm trying to say. All right. That's all I'm trying to say. All right. Let's look and see. We got some super chats. Been running my mouth for a long time. U.S. left is like saying Castro was a capitalist. And here's the bottom line. If you look at what happened, the United States created the issue in Cuba. They created Castro. The United States was using Cuba as a hooker farm, it was Las Vegas. That's what Cuba was. They were using Cuba. They were using the people there like slaves and prostitutes or what have you. And when Castro came along and said, hey, man, let's overthrow these people and run them out, a whole lot of people said, okay, because they didn't like the way we were using it to be using Cuba. And guess what? The people in Cuba got a right to do that if they want to, as far as I'm concerned. It's their business. Antonio says, was that the Neocon'S agenda to promote the Russia down the MH17 flight over Ukraine in 2014? Who actually downed the MH17? I think it was the Ukrainians myself. But I think it was the Ukrainians. But of course, the Russians did everything. Everything that ever happened. They killed Kennedy. They killed Kenny on South Park. They killed Lincoln. They, whatever. You name it, the Russians did it. Like I always say, the scary thing is Joe Biden is the most competent person in his administration. Thank you very much, JM, for the super sticker. Let's keep looking. Did I miss any super chats? I always try. I did. I missed the super chat. Felix says, what would practical steps to dissolve the CIA look like? Yeah, I wish I had that answer. I'll put it like this. The last guy that said he was going to dissolve the CIA was JFK. You see how that worked out. Sparky, did you ever find your Anthony Blinken book? Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad. Thank you, Sparky. That Sparky saved me again. You know what? As soon as I get off, it's out in my trunk. I forgot. I was looking at my moving taking stuff out of my trunk. I had 2 computers in my trunk, believe it or not, that I got. So that I'm going to build a little network around the house here, and I got a couple of computers from my office to bring here, and left them in the stinking trunk. And little did I know, the Anthony Blinken book was right there. Thank you. I will grab my Anthony Blinken book. Sparky, you are a lifesaver. I forgot that I found it and forgot that I found it. Oh, the joys of ADD. Medea says, we have only one life and it's short. So we have to speak our mind whenever, wherever, and to whoever, as long as we're here, keep up the great work. That's what I believe in. That's what I believe in. I say what I believe. Anybody don't like it? Well, too bad. Super sticker, Joseph Curry. Thank you. I don't have another option. Just say what I believe in. Oh, okay. And we got here. Bad Dude Corn Pop. What a funny name. I'm glad U.S. hegemony is on the way out, but I think we'll suffer for it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That dollar's gone. I don't know what we got. When my daughter was little, she say, I don't got any, Daddy. I don't got any. She was real little. That was her thing. Gots. I don't got any. Let's see. US. Okay, I think we got all of the super chats. I think we got all the super chats. Let's look at Rockfin. Oh boy, we got some people on Rockfin. Garland is hopelessly in. I disagree. Garland is hopelessly in love with Russia. Russia can do no wrong. Will, love is blind. In love. Yeah, I don't get that. I don't get that. I guess because if you know anything about me, you know, I don't always process emotions as well as I should. I'm a happy person, but I don't process emotions as well as some. So the idea of that I love Russia or I don't love Russia, what is Russia? What do you mean when you say Russia? Is it the country? Is it the geography? Is the people? I think there is merit to all countries. I think we should appreciate all cultures and people. And yeah, Russia, they've got beautiful food, they've got beautiful people, they've got a wonderful culture, they've got brilliant intellectuals, they've got a great history. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, the great books, The Death of Ivan Ivanovich. There was a great book. The great book where the guy who was a social climber, and he it was awesome, and he got like cut. He was working in his apartment and he got injured and he was like infected, and he found out he was going to die in a couple months, and he started realizing that everything he did for all was the death of Ivan Ivanovich or something like that. People know what I'm talking about. I'm sure there's some. So Russia's a beautiful country, like so many other beautiful countries. Russia's a beautiful country, beautiful culture, history. China, unbelievable, beautiful history. I study Zen, incredible. You know what I mean? So every country you look at has a beautiful history and culture. And so there's so many things in the United States. Look at jazz, look at rock and roll, the music, the art. You have to learn to love and appreciate all countries. It's not like I love and appreciate Russia, but I don't love and appreciate all countries and the people. Now, the ruling elite, that's usually where your problems come with in countries. That's where your problems come with. These ruling elite bastards. These in America, we got the food. Think about this. Jazz music, rock and roll, hip hop, all kinds of good music, right? And we got Epstein. That's the ruling elite class, Epstein, okay? I got some issues with the ruling elite. I'll just say Epstein. Thank you. Okay, so Bill Wilson. So let me make sure I didn't miss anybody. Thank you, Bill Wilson. Thank you, Ted Sawyer. He didn't have a question. There's Chicken Patty. Hooray, Chicken Patty. I think that's all the tips. I mean, Russell's efficient government and oligarchs. I think that you look at them through rose-colored glasses. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. Nah, it's just another country. Understand something about me. Understand something about old Garland. My mentor was Paul Robeson Jr. My mentor, the guy that politically mentored me, was Paul Robeson Jr., a man who went to school in the Soviet Union, a man, you know, his father, Paul Robeson, and his legacy with Russia. He was a guy who appreciated Russia. So I learned about the Russian culture. I learned about Russia, and I had a great appreciation for Russian culture and Russian people and Russian history, and I found it very, very interesting. So yes, I find that beautiful. Russia's a great country, but there's so many countries like that. France, I mean, you can pick any country, and you can find a lot of historical things and beautiful things about it, and beautiful artists, and on and on and on. So you study any country and you'll find some really cool and awesome stuff in its history, and you'll find some nasty stuff in its history. And when you look at its leadership, you'll find great leaders and you'll find crappy leaders, and you'll find, you know, weaker and strong and things like that. So the idea of looking at them good, bad, or indifferent, no. And the fact that I work with a lot of Russians, I get to hear both sides. I get to hear that, yes, you've got the big, beautiful cities of St. Petersburg and Moscow. You get outside of that, yes, you do have some poverty in some areas that are still poor and things of that nature. So Russia's not perfect. I know people that lived there through the 90s, talk to them all the time, who can tell me about, oh God, the hell we went through, and about places where they grew up that were very poor, that they go back now in poor areas where there's a lot of crime, it's hard to live, there's thugs and gangs and criminals. I hear stories about Russia because I work around Russian people. So no, Russia's not perfect. You know, but by any stretch of the imagination, I'll say this though. The leadership of Russia is much more practical than the United States. The U.S. leadership, Western leadership, is very ideological right now, extremely ideological, and not as practical. Russian leadership, Chinese leadership, the developing countries seem to have more practical leaders. Look at Hungary. The leader of Hungary, a guy who's to the right. I'm to the left. I don't agree with him ideologically, but he's a practical leader. He's like, man, we're just trying to eat, dude. We ain't trying to get into all of this war, ideological war for hegemony. We're trying to eat. That's a practical leader. The Russians are trying to eat. The Chinese are trying to eat. They've been poor. That's all they're trying to do. You ever been poor? You understand the importance of eating, okay? That's all I'm trying to say. All right. So, but I understand what you're saying, because there are a lot of people who see the United States as some shining city on a hill, and if anyone else says another country could be good, could be have positive things about it, they kind of get defensive. No, we're the United States. We're the best, man. You tour around the United States right now. Ooh, things ain't looking so good, man. The homelessness is insane. I mean, we got tent cities and lean-tos. We're now, like a lot of parts of this country, a third world. Poverty, 60% of the people don't have hardly like 500 bucks in the bank. People are not, but making very, very little. People are angry. You walk into McDonald's, you know, we have like freaking shootings. We have like, I mean, let's face it. You've been watching the news. I'm afraid to like go to a restaurant that some fruitcake isn't going to run in there with an AK-47 and start spraying. We got issues. I'm just saying, we got issues. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it. Did I miss anything? Somebody has this. Let's see. What's it say? Russian Constitution includes a right to education, free healthcare, and a home, from what I understand. Ralph Steiner, with hard working class, American living standards are crumbling. Yeah, our living standards are shot to hell. Every American is sure I meet hate Russia except Garland. Christina Jankovic. Oh, not another. Could she be any relation to Nina Jankovic? Oh no, it is the eat without gas stoves. There you go. What do we need gas stoves for? Stop judging people by USA propaganda lies. Exactly. And what do we got here? In the 70s, you could work hard for 3 years and pay off your house cash. Now, some banks thinking of providing multi-generational home loans. Yeah, you know, I think you'll see more and more of that. I mean, like I said, when I grew up, you know, my story is not that much of a normal American story for a lot of people. You know, I grew up, I was a little kid when I was born, very, very poor kid, very, very poor. My dad, long story, but my dad became a longshoreman and made a very, very good living as a longshoreman. He was introduced me to unions. He was in a union, and it was hard work. He didn't have much education, but guess what? It paid very, very well. And then my mother started her own business with no money. She got a couple of school buses, started a school bus company. Before you knew it, there was lines and lines of school buses everywhere and all kinds of things that had drivers coming and going, and she had a business. And it was a quintessential American story. A kid who had zero, nothing in absolute poverty to by the time, I was a teenager. We weren't hurting for a dollar, put it like that. My family was, compared to the neighborhood and community that I grew up with, we were in pretty good damn shape. So that's an American story. And neither of my parents had education, but that was a good old American story back then. You know what I mean? That was the American dream. That was a man with a 3rd grade education and a woman with an 11th grade education could go out and provide a living for and they could send their kids to college, and their kids could have a better life, and they could leave land and property for the next generation so their kids could have something to start off with. I mean, it was a good story, right? That's a good story. That ain't America no more. That ain't America no more. That was the America that I grew up in, that provided me with some pretty good opportunity. That ain't the America anymore that we live in. So there wasn't lean-tos and shacks all over the place back then. At any rate, thanks a lot, everybody. Did I miss anybody else? Refresh Rockfin super chat. Okay, there we go. Let's look over here. Okay, there we go. Linda says, great rant. This will be my new pinned tweet. Keep thinking I already know what God is going to say, but always learn something when I listen. Thanks a lot. This person says, my girlfriend's cousin was locked in the initial lockdown. They delivered food daily when life went back to normal until the freak out last year. And, look, the lockdown here was a disaster. It was a neoliberal lockdown. It was like telling a lot of people who didn't have money, who didn't have jobs, saying you got to stay in the house and we're not going to help you in any way to survive. It was a disaster. And, I knew a lot of people who weren't like a lot of the young Black guys that I grew up with, right? A lot of them had jobs where they were never locked down anyway. Like there's a car wash, right? I would go over to the car wash in the area near where I grew up, and during the so-called lockdown, and there was guys I knew that worked on roads, that worked on, blue collar kind of jobs, right? I knew one guy that worked at the Blue Plains water treatment facility, guys who worked at electric plants, things like that, where you do physical things. These people were never locked down. These people went to work every day. It was the limousine liberals, you know what I mean, that sat, I hate to admit, I was sitting behind a computer every day and I got to work from home. I was one of those people. But there was a lot of people who went to work every day and had no choice. They had to work because in order for the liberal class to sit down behind a computer stinking screen every day, these people still had to go to work and do their job normally. And then you had a lot of people that couldn't work because their way of life and the way they made money was wiped out by the lockdowns, so it was a disaster for a lot of people, for humanity. And as a result, you can ride around the United States now and see a lot of areas where all this stuff's closed and all the businesses are closed and the stores are closed and people aren't going to the store and all of this stuff crapped out. And as a result, the lockdowns were a disaster for a lot of people. They didn't talk about they never, ever, when they talked about the lockdown, they never talked about the potential for the collateral damage of the lockdowns. And there was massive collateral damage from the lockdowns. And that was not part of the discussion. It was extremely irresponsible. All right. Well, that's it. Thanks a lot. I'm tired, guys. And I appreciate, did I miss anything? No. Did I miss anybody else? No. Somebody says my friend died 65. My friend 64 died 5 days after the jab. Well, I will be honest with you. Everybody does what the things they do, and luckily for me, I always feel sorry for. I'm not going to get into it. People, to me, should be able to decide their own health care, but there were people that worked places and they didn't have a choice in the matter. Lucky for me, let me say this, you can say I'm, oh, yay, the Russians, or boo, the Russians, whatever, but I worked for the Russians. I worked for Sputnik. And, they weren't much, the Russians weren't much on, what's the term we want to see? Mandated actions, health actions. And they would say, well, we think you should do this or do that. But Garland, The decision you make is yours. And nobody at my job was forced to do anything that they didn't want to do. And I feel very fortunate about that. So I'm glad I worked for the Russians during that. I'm glad I didn't work for some company that said, you do have to do this or you don't have to do that, because I don't believe in those kinds of things. And I'm not one for doing the things that I'm told to do. And not really much of my nature. So, all right. Well, that's a whole nother story. But thanks a lot, people. Certainly appreciate it. And I will talk to you soon. Peace. I'm